Funeral services are getting underway for former President Jimmy Carter. We, of course, are monitoring that and the historic and just tragic wildfires that continue to spread across Southern California, as now there are 30,000 acres combined that have been burnt between these 5 fires. Only one of the 5 are contained at more than 10%. People have lost their lives. Obviously, thousands of homes at this point have been destroyed. Mike Thompson is here on KCMO. He's a Kansas State Senator. He is a longtime meteorologist here in Kansas City, of course, and he joins us on KCMO. Mike, as you've been following this story as a weather nerd, and I say that in a loving way, what has been on your mind with this story the last couple of days?
It's just another example of government incompetence and efficiency, just making horrible mistakes. And you see it time and again. The Maui fires were a similar type situation. They ran out of water out there. And here Gavin Newsom, I believe he removed 4 or 5 dams on the Klamath River that would allow more water to flow down into the LA area so that the fire hydrants wouldn't have run dry. And the other thing is, you hear about people claiming this is climate change, but this was a weather event. Santa Ana winds happen in Southern California all the time. They can be ferocious, 70 to 100 mile per hour winds, and they're what they call katabatic winds. So as the air flows down the side of the mountain, it compresses the air as it gets into the lower levels, and it heats the air, so it gets very hot and dry. And as you pointed out in the last half hour, they have that wet weather. The vegetation grows up, they don't clear it, and then the Santa Ana winds, all it takes is a little spark. And in LA, apparently, they've had an uptick of the homeless people starting campfires, and so they're checking it. Who knows what actually sparked this thing? But again, the simple and absolutely incorrect answer is climate change. But they'll blame. In fact, I'm looking at a pile of climate change at the end of my driveway that'll be out there till the 4th of July. So yeah, it's crazy.
That's exactly right. So Mike Thompson's here on 95.7 FM KCMO. So on that note, the weather side of you, I don't know. I know you've worked in different places during your career, but when it comes to doing controlled burns and when meteorologists recommend you do them and how you go about doing them, what can you share on that front and how California has seemingly failed on that issue for quite some time?
Oh, they've been failing for decades out there, because of the forestry management and not planting the trees. Pardon me. They've just let's even go back, say, a decade or so ago, when some of these environmental policies prohibited the clearing of easements for Pacific Gas and Electric. Part of it, well, it's kind of a two-pronged problem because they had to. They actually went bankrupt because of some of these requirements to go with green energy out there. And so they were diverting funds and resources away from maintenance on their lines and away from clearing the underbrush and the easements. So just these environmental policies to mitigate, quote unquote, climate change are actually feeding into all of this. There's been all sorts of things they could do. For example, without thinning the forest, they've allowed those forest trails to grow over. And so instead of having those logging roads available to go up into the hills to fight the fires, those logging roads are no longer there. And so the firefighters have to go in on foot. So all sorts of terrible decisions that have been made over the course of decades lead into this sort of thing. And there's a litany of all sorts of bad decisions like this.
We're a couple of years removed. There were some huge wildfires, mostly, you may remember, Mike, it more impacted like northern Oklahoma, northwest Oklahoma, Texas
Right.
Panhandle, that area. What are the fires that we deal with, not so much maybe in the Kansas City area, but western Kansas down into Oklahoma? How do they try to control those? When I lived out there in northwest Oklahoma, they had a lot of controlled burns they would do.
Right.
How is that different or similar to what they need to be doing more of in California?
Well, in our area, it's kind of a drought type situation. They do the controlled burns out in the Flint Hills also, and try to create a fire break. And so it's a similar type logic. You burn off some dead area, you create enough of a break, so that any fire that gets going in one area doesn't have any fuel to continue into another area, and that's the logic behind that, and that's where the failure is happening in California. The vegetation's allowed to grow up, the dead forestry or the dead trees in the forest allowed to continue, and so once a fire gets going in those areas, it's virtually impossible to stop. And they have, the drought is the big issue. Western Kansas and down into Oklahoma, those big fires there, once they got started, there's not a lot of water out there either because they rely on the Oologah Aquifer for their water, and there's water management issues in Western Kansas anyhow. So they have to do the controlled burns. They have to do, take advantage of when there's light wind conditions and when they can actually control what's going on. So, you can't just do it any old day, but it has to be done. And one point, interestingly, globally, wildfires have been on the decline for decades. They claim that, the atmosphere is getting hotter, we're getting more wildfires. That is absolutely false. We're seeing fewer and fewer wildfires each year. It's just in the areas where we've seen the mismanagement of underbrush and forestry, where we're seeing these out-of-control fires like in California.
That's interesting. And a texter just texted in saying, I can't say much good about Colorado anymore, but they do control burns very frequently in all of their national forests. So if you live out there, you don't have to worry like you do in California about your house burning down. Credit where it's due. I mean, that's what it comes down to. But and I know they are going to drive home, and it'll take a little bit, but they will be driving home the climate change narrative in the weeks ahead. Because what are they going to do? Blame the mayor, Governor Newsom, Joe Biden? I mean, they can't point the finger at anybody else, so it's going to be all about climate change, Mike. You know that, and I know that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And right now, I mean, you've got a La Nina across the South Pacific, which favors these Santa Ana winds. It develops that. There's a semi-permanent low that sits out there in Southern California anyhow. And these winds are a natural weather phenomenon. Has nothing to do about any kind of climate whatsoever. And again, always these people, they conflate climate versus environment. We're doing things allegedly to save the climate that are actually environmental concerns that have nothing to do with changes in the climate, changes in the weather, or anything like that. And the whole narrative is false. And I do think that more and more people are waking up to that. I think, except for the fact that it's driven by the media, and if you just tune out from the media, I think half the time you're in better shape.
Hey, they got to stay on KCMO Talk Radio, though, right?
Well, absolutely. Media, except for conservative talk radio like KCMO, which is fantastic. And I listen to you guys. I got to tell you, I listen to you guys on the way back and forth to Topeka. I love this new signal. It is just the best.
Well,
Absolutely
you're right. 95.7. I was thinking about you, Mike, when we flipped over to the big FM stick. I said, I got to get Mike Thompson out on his full drive to Topeka every day. But, yeah, this 95.7 FM signal clears all the way out to Manhattan on some days. So I'm glad you're listening, my friend.
And way down into southeast Kansas, too. Love it. Absolutely love it. Need your voice out there, Pete. You're doing a great job.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. And we appreciate what you're doing in Topeka, too. When do you guys get back to work there?
Well, we actually have our caucus Sunday night where we get our pre-session caucus briefing on everything from the budget to, I think the Attorney General is going to come and talk to us. But we swear in on Monday and we get started, and they've already got the daylight saving time bill pre-filed. So I'm sure that's going to be first out of the gate. We'll see how that goes.
Mike, you can't do it. I can't have a different time in Overland Park versus KCMO.
Well,
I mean, it doesn't work. It works in Arizona because you don't have any major cities on state lines. You can't do it here.
No, I was thinking about that. It would force your show. You would go on the air earlier in Kansas than you would in Missouri, and it would throw your whole clock off.
It would throw the entire Kansas City region off. I mean, forget about me. You can't, like, Arizona can do it. Phoenix is in the middle of the state. Like, you can't run a major metropolitan area like that.
No, it's either all or nothing. Missouri would have to be going along with it as well. It would create all sorts of confusion. It really would. And so it'll be the bill that, they pre-file bills and they put it in so they're introduced fast. That's the only. I think there was one other pre-file bill I saw that came across yesterday. Mm-hmm. So we just have two. But this is the beginning of what they call the biennium. And so bills that are introduced this year can live into next year. So it creates probably the first week or two is going to be a little bit slow while we wait for the bills to get introduced and assigned to committees. And it takes a little time to spool up the hearings and all. And so for the first week or two, you're not going to hear a lot of stuff, but I think this session is going to get very, very fast after that as some of these important issues like property tax start coming to the fore. And in fact, I have a suspicion that'll be a big point of discussion on Sunday night to see, what different ideas we have on that.
Very cool. Mike Thompson, Kansas State Senator. You know him very well from his time on television as a meteorologist here in Kansas City. Just won re-election, so he's in the mix for another 4 years there in Topeka. Mike, congratulations, and we'll be following along and talking to you soon.
Thank you, Pete. Appreciate it, and keep up the great work.
Thank you very much. That is Mike Thompson on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. Always good to have him on the show.